What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. We're coming to you after Game 5, after the Cavs season has come to a close. And it's been a wild ride, Chris, but as much as we want to talk about what happened this season, it's also looking forward into what's going to happen this offseason. So before we get into that, let's just talk about your initial reaction to this Cavs season, what you thought about this Cavs team, how they've grown, and just the emotions in the locker room after the Game 5 loss to the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference semifinals.
Ethan, to borrow the term that Max Strus used when he talked about the season as a whole, there was a lot. It was a lot. It was a long year. Players dealt with a lot of stuff. JB Bickerstaff dealt with a lot of stuff. And I just think given everything that they had to deal with throughout the course of this season, for them to get to where they did, the Eastern Conference semifinals, winning series against Orlando, win a playoff game on the road against Boston, despite the fact that there are legitimate questions coming into this offseason about JB Bickerstaff, about Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell together, about the viability of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, about the roster construction as a whole, about how this organization can try and take the next step, about how they manage players throughout the course of the regular season. All of that is real. All of that is stuff that the Cavs are going to have to answer and they're going to have to evaluate. But for them to get to this point that they did, overcoming everything that they did, I don't think you can just ignore that. I don't think you can just brush that off to the side as if it was nothing. I think JB Bickerstaff put it best, because I don't think you want to sit here after losing Game 5 against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference semifinals and playing another non-competitive playoff series for a variety of reasons. And I don't think you want to sit there and say, hey, this was a successful season. Look at everything that we did. But JB said it right, I think. It was improvement. It was a step that this organization needed to take. And I don't think that can be discounted completely.
Yeah, I mean, like JB said at his post-game press conference, they went from a play-in team to a playoff team to we won a series team, which is the first time that they had done that since 2018. First time without LeBron James since 1993. So, yeah, there are some takeaways from that. And obviously everybody was trying to play the coulda, shoulda, woulda game with
Right.
the injuries, and especially in the playoffs with the team having to use 5 different starting lineups in the playoffs. Playoffs that we had thought coming in that the Cavs were going to use 8 players, maybe? And now you had 5 different changes to that rotation of the starting unit alone. So, Chris, let's get into the offseason discussions, because there are a lot of them. And they're pretty big when it comes to how this team is going to look going forward and the success of this team. I think we start with the guy we've talked about most so far, JB Bickerstaff. The opportunity for JB to return to the Cavs after his 5th season, and he's been able to create a culture, bring them out of the mud, take them from a rebuilding team to questioning what they have to do to take the next step. Do you think he deserves another chance to be the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers?
I think sometimes after a season ends, Ethan, it becomes obvious and it becomes easy what you have to do as an organization. I don't think this is an easy answer for the Cavs. And I think that's why, from what I'm told, they're going to take their time. They're going to evaluate everything related to JB. They're going to determine who's out there on the open market. If we're going to replace him, who can we go out and get? How much better is that guy going to be? Is that a lateral move or a step forward? So I do think that there's going to be a lot of discussion internally, because you have to look at the totality of JB Bickerstaff here with the Cavs. It's not just this season. It's not just one series against Orlando, one series against Boston. It's not just last year against the New York Knicks and how he looked in that series against the Knicks, right? It's everything all mushed together. And then you determine, is he the right person for this job? If we're, as an organization, trying to take that next step, okay, we went from play-in team to playoff team. We won a series. How do we become a championship level organization? How do we get to the level that Boston is at? How do we get to the NBA Finals? And then they're going to ask themselves, is JB the right person to get us there? Does he communicate the right way with players? Are his X's and O's good enough? Is he an asset as a playoff tactician in a 7-game series? But you cannot tell the story. This is what makes it hard. You cannot tell the story of JB without saying, this is his record since taking over for John Beilein at a time when this organization was a laughingstock, when this organization was looked at as a doormat, an irrelevant team in the Eastern Conference. So you have to look at how he helped them get to this point where they are. You have to look at the fact that the Cavs have had to overcome injuries so much throughout the tenure of JB, and how he continues to get the guys to believe, to play hard, to play defense. You have to look at the things that he has done on the defensive end of the floor to make this a top 10 defense every single year since he's been in charge. It's really, really easy to sit here and say, well, the Cavs lost to the Celtics. They weren't competitive against the Celtics. The easiest move to make is the coach, because it's a players' league and it's harder when it comes to roster construction, trades, and all that kind of stuff. But again, like, I don't think you can ignore the positive things that JB has done since being a head coach, while also admitting that he has his flaws as a coach. And the question becomes, can you find somebody that does the positive things that JB does and does the negative things a little bit better? If the answer is yes, then obviously I think the Cavs move on. But it isn't a situation where there's just like a large crop of candidates that are elite high-level coaches that are waiting out there that would choose Cleveland if they had the choice. So all of that combined, I think it's a legitimate question about whether JB is the right coach to take this Cavs organization to the place where they want to go. I think his flaws when it comes to in-game management, I think his flaws when it comes to X's and O's, I think the offense and the style and the system that he runs, I think is a little bit too predictable. I don't think it's diverse enough. So I think there are legitimate questions about whether he is the right guy to take this organization where it wants to go, where it needs to go. But I also don't see a guy out there that is the right guy.
Well, if you ask Marcus Morris Sr., which we did in the post-game presser, he thinks that J.U. Bickerstaff is the guy. And obviously, Marcus might be a little bit biased because JB has been his guy since he got into the league. But, I mean, it's always good to see someone who has been one away from him for a good minute as a coach, in a coaching standpoint, to come back and still have the same kind of reviews. He said he's a player's coach because we understand that's one of J.B. Bickerstaff's better qualities as a coach, how he manages the emotions of the players on his team and how he gets them to buy into certain things that wouldn't be normal on most teams. Like a defense first heavy mindset when it comes to a team with a lot of young guys in today's NBA is kind of unheard of. But it's different to see what JB has been able to get out of guys. And obviously, I don't hear a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors or anything like that, but there could be a different thought process from the players of what
Right.
they think about JB Bickerstaff as a coach that we're just not seeing.
I don't think the guys have a high level of belief in JB as a tactician. I think there have been a variety of different players over the last couple of weeks, couple of months that have talked about strategies, that have talked about schemes, that have talked about rotations, X's and O's. So many of the guys have subtly said, we have enough talent in this locker room. And to me, I take that as we have enough talent. The players are right. The roster construction is right, but we don't have the right guy. We don't have the right guy to manage that talent. We don't have the right guy to maximize that talent. That's my view of it. When you have a bunch of players that talk over and over and over again about the talent, we should have accomplished more. We should have done more. And yeah, there are circumstances tied into why the Cavs were not able to be more competitive with the Celtics, why the Cavs lost in 5 games against the Celtics. They go beyond JB. But I do think it's very, very telling that every single player, Max Strus again tonight following the loss, said, we have enough. With the talent that we have in this locker room, we should have accomplished more. So that leads you down the path of, okay, why didn't you accomplish more? And I think there is enough guys in that locker room that believe that JB was part of why they didn't accomplish more.
All right, Chris. It's time to move on to the next topic of off-season roster reconstruction. And at the top of that list is the guy that this franchise might want to build around, and that's Donovan Mitchell. And he has not been playing. He hasn't played in the last 2 games, as we both know. And the Cavs fought tooth and nail to try and get back into a series without their star player, without their best player, like Max Strus said in his post-game presser, and came up short. And obviously, a lot of them said that it could have been a different series if Donovan was healthy. It could have been a different series if Jarrett was healthy, which are all true statements. But now we have to talk about the conversation that will probably be the most highlighted this summer. Is Donovan Mitchell going to be a Cavalier long term? What are your thoughts on the situation surrounding Donovan, Chris?
Well, to what you were saying about coulda, shoulda, woulda, there is a belief from Donovan Mitchell that the Cavs would have been competitive in this series against the Celtics. The level that he was playing at, the level that Jarrett Allen was playing at early in the playoffs against Orlando, there was a belief coming into this series against the Celtics, with Boston not having Kristaps Porzingis, that the Cavs could have pushed the Celtics. That is a belief that my sources tell me Donovan had. So I do feel like he left that locker room tonight saying, we didn't get a real, fair, honest shot to give Boston our best shot. And if we would have, this could have been a different series. But that wasn't the case. Donovan wasn't able to play in the final 2 games, and that makes it a little bit more difficult in terms of his future. So the Cavs are going to do everything possible to say, this is the right place for you to be. This is the right basketball situation for you. There isn't a clear-cut, better basketball situation out there for you. The grass isn't always greener. The contract extension is going to be laid out to him this summer. And it's just about, for Donovan, everything that I know to be true about him is it's about winning. It's about winning at the highest level. That's how he judges himself. And look, when it comes to decisions with free agency or whether a player is going to request a trade, there are other factors that come into play as well. But to me, the primary focus of Donovan when it comes to his basketball future is about where can I compete for championships? Not how do I get to the playoffs, not how do I win 50 plus games in the regular season, not how do I become an MVP level player. How do I compete for championships? Where's the best situation for me to compete for championships? I don't believe that he has a ton of confidence in JB and JB's system and JB's offense. Um, but I don't know that Donovan would say um, that the coach is the driving force behind this decision. I think most players would say it's the talent around me, it's the supporting cast, it's the situation from a roster standpoint, it's the level of improvement that can come from a roster either externally or internally. So I do think Donovan has a legitimate decision to make here, and I don't think it's an easy decision. I do think there are pros and cons for him staying. I do think he likes aspects of this organization. I do think he likes aspects of this team. I just think he also believes, based on the way things have gone throughout the course of this postseason, that there is a lack of readiness on the roster. And I do believe that one of Darius or Donovan will not be back next year on this team. And I do believe that there have been times where Donovan has been frustrated with the lack of readiness, the lack of seriousness that Darius sometimes takes things.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the Boston Celtics a lot, obviously, because this is the last series of the season. And we talked about Max Strus being cut by the Boston Celtics in 2019 and holding a grudge to the point that he wanted to wear a Florida Panthers hockey jersey into the arena for what ended up being the final game of the season. And I'm not going to lie. I feel like Max Strus would have been irritated with Jason Tatum if he was still on that Celtics team, with how much Jason Tatum just does his own thing. Like, there is a video that came out the other day of Joe Mazzulla and literally like 2 or 3 other coaches on the bench trying and waving their arms as like a third base coach to trying to get Jason Tatum to move the ball up the floor. And Jason just said, I'm going to take it at my pace and do what I need to do to get to my spots. But that comes back to the players on the Cavs team that are serious, that want to get to that level and know that they have to have a certain mindset to get to where they want to go. And you've seen it. Donovan and Max, they complement each other really well because they understand the work ethic, the drive, the playoff readiness that they have to be successful at that caliber and that state of. Yeah, exactly. And Darius just might not be wired the same way. He might not take things as seriously as he might need to at times. He makes sloppy turnovers. He does things that you question, would someone that wants to get to the next stage of his career do? Like, we talked about, there were different players in that locker room that had the expectation of getting past the first round of the playoffs as a successful season. Darius was one of them.
Right.
Donovan Mitchell, on the other hand, said, I want to get to the Eastern Conference Finals or the NBA Finals. That's success. That's success. So, and I mean, Max Strus the same way. He said we didn't just come here to get past the first round. Tristan Thompson, same way. There are guys in that locker room, again, the talent in that locker room that believes that they could have done more. And like you said, Chris, even though it's going to be ugly to move Darius Garland's contract, I think that makes the most sense going forward. Not because of how they play together, Donovan and Darius, but because of the mentality that Darius has going forward and if he's ready to take that step. And I think he had the opportunity to show that he was ready to with Donovan out the last 2 games, and he did it in game 4, but in game 5 he simply just did not show up. So,
yeah. I think the other thing is just how much does the front office look at this season as a success. And we're probably going to have an opportunity in the next couple of days to talk to Kobe Altman, the president of basketball operations, get his thoughts. It's going to be a state of the team, state of the franchise, recap of the season. All of that is going to come. And it's like, does he feel there needs to be a fall guy? Does he feel that a change needs to be made, either with the roster or with the coach? And it's just hard right now with feeling so raw, the season, the end of the season so fresh. If there's something that he feels like was missing from this team, or does he look at it and say, look, it would have been different if Donovan would have played. It would have been different if Jarrett would have played. It would have been different if Karis LeVert would have been able to play in Game 5. You know what I mean? Like, I do think, not that there are built-in excuses, but I do think there are logical reasons and explanations for why the Cavs weren't more competitive in this series against Boston that go beyond bad coach, bad roster, bad fit between Donovan and Darius, bad fit potentially between Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. Like, the things that so many people are going to ask this offseason. Like, I do think we need to ask those questions. I do think the front office is going to ask those questions as well. They have to evaluate every single level of this organization. They have to ask themselves the difficult questions to find the right answers. But when you have logical explanations that point to why something happened that go beyond those things, it does become a more complicated evaluation.
Yeah, you got into it briefly. The next topic that we got to get into is Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. And we've talked about it all season and how those guys have been, how the backbone has been built behind the Cavs defense. But I think Evan Mobley showed a lot in this playoff series, especially against the Celtics. And I think he's shown, since Jared has been out, that he is capable of bearing the task of being the starting center full time. And sure, when I asked JB Bickerstaff today after the game about him potentially moving to the 5 full time, he said, we have Jared Allen. We love Jared Allen. And I think that's a conversation that has to be had after evaluation of the season, an evaluation of what this team needs, because in every game that the Cavs scored 100 points or more in the playoffs this year, it was just Evan Mobley out there. And that's not by coincidence. It's because a 5 that is a non-shooter with another 4 that's a non-shooter creates less spacing for a team that is built around its shooting. And then also just the point that the Cavs also have point of attack defenders that can ease the livelihood of Evan Mobley in the paint, on top of the fact that Evan Mobley is a world-class defender in his own right. So, do I think Jared Allen had a fantastic season up until he got injured? Yes. Do I think he was probably the best player on the Cavs besides Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs before he got injured? Again, yes. But sometimes it comes down to where this organization wants to go and who in the right mind. Because we've talked about it, Chris. The Cavs have been waiting for Evan Mobley to take that step, to become a center, to become a scorer, to become something that they thought when they drafted him was a possibility. And I think they got glimpses of that in the postseason. How do you think this team goes around it? Because like Jimmy said in one of the podcasts a couple of days ago, it's two very weird iterations of of pairings that have caused for questioning and speculation for the Cavs with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, as we talked about earlier, and now Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. I don't know if they break both of those sets up in one summer, but I wanted to know what you thought.
I just think there's a lot of evidence this past year, and it's hard to use only this past year as the evidence, Ethan. because there were a lot of wonky things going on with this team. Evan Mobley missed a lot of time with injury. Donovan Mitchell missed a lot of time with injury. Some of their most important players were in and out of the lineup, and various things were going on early on in the season where the Cavs were trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like with Max Strus? How do we integrate him into this offense? How do we try and capitalize on some of his off-ball movement, his spacing, his shooting? How do we play effective offensive basketball with a chess piece that did not exist on this roster the year before? In saying that, the combination of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley was not good this year for the Cavs. I don't think it was good enough to justify, like, this is a duo that we can't possibly break up. Even in the postseason, with those two guys on the floor together, there were some struggles. There were some clear offensive struggles and offensive limitations. And I just believe that the Cavs will have a higher ceiling offensively. Not the same ceiling defensively, obviously, but a higher ceiling offensively if they go with one primary ball handler, 3 wings, and 1 big. And that, to me, leads me down the road of splitting up Jarrett and Evan. Because I just think that allows them to become potentially the offensive team that they'll need to become, especially in a 7-game playoff series against the top teams in the NBA. I also think it gives Evan a little bit more freedom, right? I think how he's used is a little bit different too. If you think about tonight, Evan was great at both ends of the floor. 15 of 24 from the field, 33 points, 4 assists, 7 rebounds. It wasn't always, okay, he's got a mismatch in the post, we're going to give him the ball in the post, and then it's going to be up to him to try and find a way to make some kind of move that benefits him or benefits the team. Like, they got him the ball on the move. They got him the ball in the pocket. They allowed him to do a little bit of facing up. It's just harder to do some of those things when you're sharing the floor with another big man who is right there next to you in the paint. He's in the dunker spot. He's along the baseline. If that guy's not spread out to the 3-point line, it just changes the dynamic of the offense. And I think you saw an unleashed Evan Mobley in different facets of how he was used offensively. That kind of gave you a glimpse of, oh, that's something that maybe we can tap into moving forward. So obviously they would lose something defensively, Ethan. There's no doubt about that, because what makes their defense special and unique is that they've got 2 all defensive player of the year type rim protectors. And they protect the paint better than any team in the NBA. So that would obviously change. And you saw some signs of that in this series against Boston. Now, Boston's an offensive machine, but you saw some signs of that against Boston. Especially if you're going to have 2 undersized guards out there on the perimeter at the point of attack. That flaw probably gets exploited a little bit more, especially by quality opponents. So that all leads me down the path of, I think it would benefit the Cavs to break those 2 guys up. And I do think they're going to give strong consideration to doing that.
Yeah, and I asked Evan what he had learned about himself and what he had learned about just being able to play the 5 without Evan being on the court. And he said his comfortability increased dramatically because he hadn't been getting reps at the 5 position most of the time, or being able to start the game and know that was going to be his assignment, his role, and adjusting to those on the fly. And him being able to learn that in a playoff scenario against probably the best team in the NBA, it was good for him. And it was funny because Marcus Morris Sr. was sitting right next to him. And somebody had asked Marcus about the Celtics and how he's seen Tatum rise and evolve and if they'll win the NBA Finals and things like that. But Marcus turned it around and was like, I could see Evan having a jump like Tatum did and be able to be that next guy and go to that next level. And you saw it in this series. And Evan said the main thing that he remembers and will take from this series is that he needs to be aggressive no matter what.
Right.
And like you said, Chris, understanding that he was able to, we've talked about it all series. He hasn't had a move to go to. He hasn't had a move that he's put to memory that he can go to at any stage of the game. Today, we saw him trying stuff out, seeing what worked, going into work in the post, in the mid post, on the baseline, and being able to just post up or whatever. But we also saw him bringing the ball up in transition, and it didn't matter this time who was in front of him. He was attacking. And that's a growth aspect for Evan. And it's something that he's going to need to have going forward to, like we think is going to happen or potentially happen, be the full-time 5 for the Cavs going forward. But
So Jared and Evan played 4 games together in the playoffs. I think it's important to point this out. 80 total minutes in the postseason together. The Cavs' offensive rating with both those guys on the floor was 99.4. That's just not good enough. And I'm not saying it's all because of those guys. There were other factors involved too. But you just feel like something with this Cavs offense is always going to be held back. Unless, and this is the caveat, unless Evan becomes the perimeter threat that this organization still believes he can be. And unless that happens quickly, as soon as next year. If that happens, and he can be as comfortable playing on the perimeter as he is when he gets the ball in the pocket, when he gets the ball as a roller, when he gets the ball in the dunker spot and stuff like that, then that changes the equation completely. But that was the same question that we had coming off of last year's loss against the Knicks, right? The general we all wondered, okay, is that a viable pairing together, or are there too many offensive limitations? And the thinking from the organization then was, well, yeah, we understand. We're giving up space. We're giving up some offensive potential. But the defense of those two guys together is so dynamic and so unique that we can't possibly split them up consistently. The defense of the Cavs, with both of them on the floor together this year, it wasn't that same level of dominance. And I wonder if that kind of changes the thinking. In saying all of this, Ethan, I was having a lot of conversations with a lot of people, both around the league and inside the organization, over the last couple of weeks in preparation for this moment, the Cavs losing in the playoffs eventually. And somebody brought up a really, really good point about the whole Jarrett Evan Mobley thing together. And I think I have to bring this up because I think people have to see this perspective of it as well. Because I think it's really easy to sit here and say, look, the offense with those two guys together is just limited, right? And I think that's a real thing that the Cavs have to parse through and figure out. But every great team in the NBA has their thing, right? There's a certain sauce, a secret sauce that makes them so spectacular. I think when it comes to Boston, it's the fact that they have maybe better wings than any team in the entire NBA. When it comes to Dallas, it's Luka and what he's able to dictate in terms of on the offensive end of the floor and the way that he can just break down any defensive scheme at any moment. And he just brings everybody up around him. When it comes to the Nuggets, it's the playmaking of a 5-man. That is so unique. That is so different. They run their offense through Jokic as a hub. So, like, those are just a few examples of what makes some of these high-quality teams so unique, and that's their quote-unquote thing, right? And you can go through the other list as well, but I don't want to belabor the point. I guess with the New York Knicks, it's the fact that they have so many ISO beaters. When it comes to the Cavs, like theoretically, if this all works out the way that the Cavs believe or believed at one point that it could, their thing could be the bigness of the front court and just how talented those two guys are together. And dealing with that level of size and skill in the front court, it's a handful for a lot of teams. There aren't a lot of teams that have that kind of matchup that can counter that. There are some, but there aren't a lot. You know what I mean? And it's something that the Cavs have to consider before they push the button to break those guys up. Because once that's broken up, the Cavs lose what could potentially be their thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about that being their identity all year. And it like that's why I said I don't know if you could go and break up Darius and Donovan and then in the same summer break up Evan and Jarrett, because you don't know if having the two small guards or not having the two small guards would increase the defense of Evan and Jarrett, because they're not always looking to help and stay out or whatever, or help side defense and stuff like that, which we know Evan thrives off of because that has been his role since he got with the Cavs with Jared Allen as his running mate. But Chris, I don't want to go into who the Cavs should keep, who they shouldn't keep for the remainder of this podcast. I just want to know one final thing, because we talked about it being an improvement. But do you consider this season a success for the Cavs based on everything they went through this year?
I don't think it was a success, Ethan, because I don't think they were competitive enough with the Celtics. And again, there are a variety of reasons for that. And it would have been really, really nice when trying to answer this question fairly and honestly to see what it would have looked like with a full strength roster, and if the Cavs would have had an opportunity to give it their best shot. I just think it would have been more informative, obviously. They took the step that they needed to take by winning a playoff series. It was harder than it probably should have been, but playoffs are hard. Winning games in the playoffs is not something that you can ever take for granted. So I don't consider the season a success as a whole, just because of the way things ended and the way things went in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Like, I didn't have a huge question coming into this year based on the moves that the Cavs made in the offseason, the enhancements that they made to the roster. My question coming into this year was not specifically, are you good enough to beat Orlando in a 7-game series? It's not the Cavs' fault that was their first round playoff matchup. They only play who's in front of them. Some would say that they manipulated to get that matchup. Nonetheless, I didn't sit here and say, are they better than Orlando? Are they better than Indy? I wanted to see like how close to the top tier Eastern Conference teams they were. And I didn't get that answer. I think they were far away, too far away for me to consider it a success. But I have to qualify that particular answer with the fact that I didn't get to see them in a playoff series against the Celtics with Jared Allen, with a healthy Donovan Mitchell, and all those different factors. How about you? Do you think it was a success?
I'm going to say yes, just because of how much they had to deal with. And I think J.B. Bickerstaff put it really well. The amount of injuries that they dealt with throughout the season, the amount of personal stuff that they had to go through, the Tristan Thompson suspension, all of that, and the timing of everything that happened for this team this year was always seeming to be at the worst part of the season. It couldn't happen at a worse time. And yet, still, this team not only gained a home court advantage in the playoffs, in a series where, or in a season where everybody had thought that they were just going to fall off the rails, and not only won that series for the first time since 2018, like we said, but got it. And I think we can both agree that we don't know what would have happened against the Celtics, but I think a lot of people in this organization think that the Cavs could have pushed the Celtics if they had everybody that they wanted at full strength, at health, and with all of those things. So I think based on the situation, based on everything that they went through this season, it was a success because they wanted to take a step. And taking a step is a success. Progress is progress. That's what I go by. And do I think it was the most successful that it could have been? No. But do I think still you can consider it a success because they got to where they said they wanted to at the beginning of the season? Sure. But Dan Gilbert tweeted after the Cavs lost saying that the future is bright in the land. And I think we've talked about how the future could be potentially really nice in Cleveland because of the changes that could be made, the people that could possibly get brought to Cleveland. Somebody that was at Game 4 in Cleveland. I'm not going to give any more teases than that. But, I mean, it just feels like this organization is going in the right direction. And it feels like they're 1, 2, 3 moves away from being a team that can compete. And sure, you don't know what those moves are until they're made or until the next season comes and if they actually get to where they want to go, which at the end of the day is the NBA Finals. But, Chris, so if you don't have it.
No. Let me ask you really quick before you get out of here, because you brought something up, and I want to ask you, not specifically what move they need to make. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, trade for this guy or this guy or this guy. We'll get into that as the summer goes on for sure. But is there a skill set or is there a positional weakness that or coaching weakness that you believe needs to be addressed first and foremost?
I mean, I think the easiest answer is they need a second star. They need somebody else that can help Donovan Mitchell because we've said during the season he's a 1B kind of player. He needs another 1B, 1A to be able to take his game to the next level and to take this organization to the next level. But, I mean, I think we've talked about it, Chris. I think the power forward spot, a stretch 4 that can shoot the ball. Obviously, Dean Wade is great off the bench, but that's his best role, coming off the bench and shutting whatever offense down. I don't think the Cavs, especially if he has to undergo surgery this summer, are going to plan to have him in the starting lineup for next year, depending on what they do. So I think going out and getting a 3-4 that can shoot, that's bigger than what they have now. 6'10" would be probably the better size, 6'9", 6'10". Again, I'm not alluding to anything. And just knowing that I think that's the biggest thing for this team. They have a lot of players that can do one thing. They have scorers or they have defenders. They need somebody that can do both. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think the Cavs are looking for, or I would hope that they would go get to take that next step for this team.
That's what stands out to me too, Ethan, is that for the first few games in the series, it was not this way tonight. But for the first few games in this series, for Dean Wade to miss 2 months, rejoin the lineup, be on a minute restriction, and look like the most playable wing that they had, kudos to Dean, right? He deserves a lot of credit for battling through that and playing to that impactful level in spurts in the first couple of games back. But that should not be the case. You know what I mean? Like, they had to get more from Isaac Okoro in this series, and they didn't. They had to get more consistency from Max Strus in this series, and they didn't. They had to get something from Marcus Morris Sr., and they didn't until Game 5. Now, part of that was JP Bickerstaff didn't play him. They had to get something more from George Niang. He's more of a 4 than a 3/4. But that's the point. Like, for Dean Wade to miss all of that time, come back, and then look like the most effective wing that they had that was available, that can't happen. And that speaks volumes about the dearth of talent and the dearth of reliability, I should say. Talent's not the right word. The dearth of reliability at that particular spot. In the Cavs, it's the hardest spot to fill in the NBA. It is the most sought-after commodity. If you're going to trade for it, you're giving up a huge bundle of stuff to get that. If you're going to try and go out and sign that in free agency, you're going to have to overpay, and you're going to have a whole bunch of competition for whoever that player is going to be. But I think for the Cavs to take the next step from a roster construction standpoint, that needs to be the primary target. And if that means a difficult decision when it comes to pairing Darius Garland and Jarrett Allen together, then that's something that they have to explore. If that means parting with Karis LeVert and other future assets, then that's something that they have to explore. But that has to, that position or that skill set or that archetype, that has to be the primary goal to me this offseason for this front office.
Yeah, and I mean, just to wrap this up really quickly, I mean, Dean Wade looked to have tweaked his knee again in Game 5 and trying to guard Jason Tatum. And, he was hobbling and trying to defend and trying not to come out of the game and played more minutes than Isaac Okoro while being on a minute restriction. And if it wasn't for Marcus Morris Sr. having one of his best games in the playoffs in a long time, he would have played more minutes. And I'm talking about Dean Wade. So
Dean told me after the game that he is going to take a month off. That's how long he needs to let his knee rest and recover before getting back into basketball-related activity. If that tells you anything about how painful it was for him to play and what he went through just to be able to play over the last 3 games. He told me at least a month to rest that knee now that the season is over.
Yeah, and I like I said in the last podcast, that blue collar strength, that kind of strength is different because there's no way he should have been playing or back, and the people in the organization said that too. But
yeah, all
right, that wraps up the Wine and Gold Talk podcast for my year 1 on the beat. And Chris, you've been doing this for a long time, but we got to wrap this up and get into the off season. But until then, until next time, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Yes, we are still going to be sending out information during the off season. We will still be doing a podcast 5 days of the week. So to get all that information and to get to know us and find out when we'll be dropping these episodes, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out. We'll see you in the off season.